Materialism and the Dialectical Method by Maurice Cornforth. Author's note on the 4th edition. This little book on materialism and the dialectical method originated from lectures given under the auspices of the London District Committee of the Communist Party of Great Britain in 1950. That was a long time ago, and a lot has been thought and written on the subject since then. I am glad that nevertheless it has continued to be found useful, though to try to make it so, I have now had to revise it 3 times over. In these revisions, I have changed as little as possible. In preparing this 4th edition, I have made mostly only minor stylistic changes, intended to render the meaning clearer and to avoid misunderstandings. In particular, I have left intact references to J.V. Stalin's booklet on Dialectical and Historical Materialism, and Mao Zedong's lecture on contradictions, both of which seem to me to remain worthy of quotation, whatever may be objected against other words and deeds of their authors. The only substantial change I have made is in the reference to biology and the controversial theories of Trofim Lysenko in Chapter 7, where what I had written originally was obviously written in error. I would like to stress that this book has no pretensions to be anything more than an introduction. It is not a textbook of Marxist philosophy, but an introduction to some key philosophical ideas of Marxism, which it still remains for Marxists to work out, criticize, and develop further. Maurice Cornforth, London, January 1968. Part 1. Materialism. Chapter 1. Party Philosophy. Party philosophy and class philosophy. A revolutionary working class party needs a revolutionary working class philosophy, and that philosophy is dialectical materialism. This assertion may appear a strange one, both to many politicians and to many philosophers. But we will not begin to understand dialectical materialism unless we can grasp the thought which lies behind it. Let us ask, first of all, what conception of philosophy lies behind the assertion that a political party, or, since a party is always the political representative of a class needs to work out and adopt a definite philosophy of its own. By philosophy is usually meant our most general account of the nature of the world and of mankind's place and destiny in it, our world outlook. That being understood, it is evident that everybody has some kind of philosophy, even though he has never learned to discuss it. Everybody is influenced by philosophical views, even though he has not thought them out for himself and cannot formulate them. Some people, for example, think that this world is nothing but a vale of tears, and that our life in it is the preparation for a better life in another and better world. They accordingly believe that we should suffer whatever befalls us with fortitude, not struggling against it, but trying to do whatever good we can to our fellow creatures. This is one kind of philosophy, one kind of world outlook. Other people think that the world is a place to grow rich in, and that each should look out for himself. This is another kind of philosophy. But granted that our philosophy is our world outlook, the task arises of working out this world outlook systematically and in detail, turning it into a well-formulated and coherent theory, turning vaguely held popular beliefs and attitudes into more or less systematic doctrines. This is what the philosophers do. By the time the philosophers have worked out their theories, they have often produced something very complicated, very abstract, and very hard to understand. But even though only a comparatively few people may read and digest the actual productions of philosophers, these productions may and do have a very wide influence. For the fact that philosophers have systematized certain beliefs reinforces those beliefs and helps to impose them upon wide masses of ordinary people. Hence, everyone is influenced in one way or another by philosophers, even though they have never read the works of those philosophers. And if this is the case, then we cannot regard the systems of the philosophers as being wholly products of the brain work of the individual philosophers. Of course, the formulation of views, the peculiar ways in which they are worked out and written down, is the work of the particular philosopher. But the views themselves, in their most general aspect, have a social basis in ideas which reflect the social activities and social relations of the time, and which, therefore, do not spring ready-made out of the heads of philosophers. From this, we may proceed a step further. When society is divided into classes, and society has always been divided into classes ever since the dissolution of the primitive communes, that is to say, throughout the entire historical period to which the history of philosophy belongs, then the various views which are current in society always express the outlooks of various classes. We may conclude, therefore, that the various systems of the philosophers also always express a class outlook. They are, in fact, nothing but the systematic working out and theoretical formulation of a class outlook, or, if you prefer, of the ideology of definite classes. Philosophy is, and always has been, class philosophy. Philosophers may not realize this, but that does not alter the fact. For people do not and cannot think in isolation from society, and therefore from the class interests and class struggles which pervade society, any more than they can live and act in such isolation. A philosophy is a world outlook, an attempt to understand the world, mankind, and man's place in the world. Such an outlook cannot be anything but the outlook of a class, and the philosopher functions as the thinking representative of a class. How can it be otherwise? Philosophies are not imported from some other planet, but are produced here on Earth by people involved, whether they like it or not, in existing class relations and class struggles. Therefore, whatever philosophers say about themselves, there is no philosophy which does not embody a class outlook, or which is impartial as opposed to partisan in relation to class struggles. Search as we may, we shall not find any impartial, non-partisan, non-class philosophy. Bearing this in mind, then, we shall find that the philosophies of the past have all, in one way or another, expressed the outlook of the so-called educated classes. That is to say, of the exploiting classes. In general, it is the leaders of society who express and propagate their ideas in the form of systematic philosophies. And up to the appearance of the modern working class, which is the peculiar product of capitalism, these leaders have always been the exploiting classes. It is their outlook which has dominated philosophy, just as they have dominated society. We can only conclude from this that the working class, if today it intends to take over leadership of society, needs to express its own class outlook in philosophical form, and to oppose this philosophy to the philosophies which express the outlook and defend the interests of the exploiters. The services rendered by Marx and Engels to the working class may be expressed in a few words. Thus, they taught the working class to know itself and be conscious of itself, and they substituted science for dreams, wrote Lenin in his obituary on Frederick Engels. Marx and Engels founded and established the revolutionary theory of working class struggle, which illumines the road by which the working class can throw off capitalist exploitation, can take the leadership of all the masses of the people, and so free the whole of society, once and for all, of all oppression and exploitation of man by man. They taught that without its own party, independent of all bourgeois parties, the working class certainly could not win victory over capitalism, could not lead the whole of society forward to the abolition of capitalism and the establishment of socialism. Lenin further developed the Marxist teachings about the party. He showed that the party must act as the vanguard of its class, the most conscious section of its class, and that it is the instrument for winning and wielding political power. To fulfill such a role, the party must evidently have knowledge, understanding, and vision. In other words, it must be equipped with revolutionary theory on which its policies are based and by which its activities are guided. This theory is the theory of Marxism. And it is not just an economic theory, nor yet exclusively a political theory, but a world outlook, a philosophy. Economic and political views are not and never can be independent of a general world outlook. Specific economic and political views express the world outlook of those who hold such views, and conversely, philosophical views find expression in views on economics and politics. Recognizing all this, a revolutionary party of the working class cannot but formulate, and having formulated, hold fast to, develop, and treasure its party philosophy. In this philosophy, dialectical materialism, are embodied the general ideas by means of which the party understands the world which it is seeking to change, and in terms of which it defines its aims and works out how to fight for them. In this philosophy are embodied the general ideas by means of which the party seeks to enlighten and organize the whole class, and to influence, guide, and win over all the masses of working people, showing the conclusions which must be drawn from each stage of the struggle, helping people to learn from their own experience how to go forward towards socialism. And so we see why it is that in our times a philosophy has arisen which expresses the revolutionary world outlook of the working class. Experience itself has taught the party the need for philosophy. For experience shows that if we do not have our own revolutionary socialist philosophy, then inevitably we borrow our ideas from hostile anti-socialist sources. If we do not adopt today the outlook of the working class and of the struggle for socialism, then we adopt, or slip into without meaning to do so, that of the capitalists and of the struggle against socialism. This is why the working class party if it is to be the genuine revolutionary leadership of its class and is not to mislead its class by the importation of hostile capitalist ideas and of policies corresponding to such ideas, must be concerned to formulate, defend, and propagate its own revolutionary philosophy. Class, philosophy, and truth. Against what has just been said about a class and party philosophy, the objection is bound to be raised that such a conception is a complete travesty of the whole idea of philosophy. Class interests may incline us to believe one thing rather than another, some will say, but should not philosophy be above this? Should not philosophy be objective and impartial and teach us to set class and party interests aside and to seek only for the truth? For surely what is true, whether this suits some or other class interests or not. If philosophy is partisan, party philosophy, how can it be objective? How can it be true philosophy? In reply to such objections, we may say that the working class standpoint in philosophy is very far indeed from having no concern for truth. Is there no such thing as truth? Of course there is, and men are getting nearer to it. For different outlooks, partisan as they may be, are not on a level so far as nearness to truth is concerned. Every philosophy embodies a class outlook. Yes, but just as one class differs from another in its social role and in its contribution to the development of society, so one philosophy embodies positive achievements in comparison with another in the working out of the truth about the world and society. People are prone to believe that if we adopt a partisan class standpoint, then we turn our backs on truth, and that, on the other hand, if we genuinely seek for truth, then we must be strictly impartial and non-partisan. But the contrary is the case. It is only when we adopt the partisan standpoint of, historically, the most progressive class that we are able to get nearer to truth. The definition of dialectical materialism, therefore, as the philosophy of the revolutionary working class party, is in no way incompatible with the claim of dialectical materialism to express truth and to be a means of arriving at truth. On the contrary, we have every right to make this claim in view of the actual historical position and role of the working class. Except for the working class, all other classes which have aspired to take the leadership of society have been exploiting classes. But every exploiting class, whatever its achievements, has always to find some way of disguising its real position and aims, both from itself and from the exploited, and of making out that its rule is just and permanent. For such a class can never recognize its real position and aims as an exploiting class or the temporary character of its own system. For example, in ancient slave society, Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of antiquity, made out that the institution of slavery was decreed by nature, since some men were by nature slaves. In the heyday of feudal society, the greatest philosopher of the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas, represented the entire universe as being a kind of feudal system. Everything was arranged in a feudal hierarchy, with God surrounded by the chief archangels at the top. Everything depended on what was next above it in the system, and nothing could exist without God. As for capitalism, it dissolves all feudal ties and as Marx and Engels observed in the Communist Manifesto, has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. This was reflected in the beginnings of capitalist philosophy, especially in Britain. This philosophy saw the world as consisting of independent atoms, each complete in itself, concerned only with itself, and all interacting. This was a mirror of capitalist society as seen by the rising bourgeoisie. And by means of such ideas, they succeeded, too, in disguising their own aims of domination and profit. Worker and capitalist were on a level. Each was a free human atom, and they entered into a free contract, the one to work, the other to provide capital and pay wages. But the working class does not need any such false consciousness as is contained in such philosophies. It does not want to set up a new system of exploitation, but to abolish all exploitation of man by man. For this reason, it has no interest whatever in disguising anything, but rather in understanding things just as they really are. For the better it understands the truth, the more it is strengthened in its struggle. Moreover, other classes have always wanted to perpetuate themselves and to last out for as long as they could, and so they have favored philosophical systems which give themselves a permanent place in the universe. Such systems attempt to define the nature of the universe so as to represent certain things and certain relations as being necessary, eternal, and unchangeable. And then they make it appear that a particular social system is a necessary part of the whole. But the working class does not need to perpetuate itself. On the contrary, it needs to do away with its own existence as a class as quickly as possible and to establish a classless society. Therefore, the working class has no use at all for any philosophical system which establishes any false permanence. Its class position and aims are such that it can afford to and needs to recognize and trace out the change coming into being and ceasing to be of everything in existence. Our party philosophy, then, has a right to lay claim to truth, for it is the only philosophy which is based on a standpoint which demands that we should always seek to understand things just as they are, in all their manifold changes and interconnections, without disguises and without fantasy. A revolution in philosophy. The Marxian doctrine is omnipotent because it is true, wrote Lenin. It is complete and harmonious and provides men with an integral world conception which is irreconcilable with any form of superstition, reaction, or defense of bourgeois oppression. From the three sources and three component parts of Marxism. And he further wrote, there is nothing resembling sectarianism in Marxism, in the sense of its being a hidebound, petrified doctrine, a doctrine which arose away from the high road of development of world civilization. On the contrary, the genius of Marx consists precisely in the fact that he furnished answers to questions the foremost minds of mankind had already raised. his teachings arose as the direct and immediate continuation of the teachings of the greatest representatives of philosophy, political economy, and socialism. In its philosophical aspect, Marxism appears as the culmination of a whole great development of philosophical thought in which the problems of philosophy were posed and took shape in the course of a series of revolutions, its highest point being reached in the classical German philosophy of the early 19th century. But if Marxism is thus the continuation and culmination of the past achievements of philosophy, it is a continuation which puts an end to an epoch and constitutes a new point of departure. For in comparison with past philosophies, it launches out on new lines. It constitutes a revolution in philosophy, an end to the systems of the past, a philosophy of an entirely new kind. Marxism is no longer a philosophy which expresses the world outlook of an exploiting class, of a minority, striving to impose its rule and its ideas upon the masses of the people in order to keep them in subjection, but it is a philosophy which serves the common people in their struggle to throw off all exploitation and to build a classless society. Marxism is a philosophy which seeks to understand the world in order to change it. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways, wrote Marx. The point, however, is to change it. Therefore, if we could say of past philosophy that it has been an attempt to understand the world and man's place and destiny in it, an attempt necessarily conditioned by the class outlook, prejudices, and illusions of the various exploiting class philosophers, we have to say of Marxist philosophy that it is an attempt to understand the world in order to change the world and to shape and realize man's destiny in it. Dialectical materialism is a theoretical instrument in the hands of the people for use in changing the world. Marxism, therefore, seeks to base our ideas of things on nothing but the actual investigation of them, arising from and tested by experience and practice. It does not invent a system, as previous philosophies have done, and then try to make everything fit into it. Thus, dialectical materialism is, in the truest sense, a popular philosophy, a scientific philosophy, and a philosophy of practice. The revolutionary characteristics of dialectical materialism are embodied in the two features of Marxist philosophy which give it its name, dialectics and materialism. In order to understand things so as to change them, we must study them, not according to the dictates of any abstract system, but in their real changes and interconnections. And that is what is meant by dialectics. We must set aside preconceived ideas and fancies about things, and strive to make our theories correspond to the real conditions of material existence. And that means that our outlook and theory is materialistic. In dialectical materialism, wrote Engels in his book Ludwig Feuerbach, the materialist world outlook was taken really seriously for the first time and was carried through consistently, for it was resolved to comprehend the real world, nature, and history just as it presents itself to everyone who approaches it free from preconceived idealist fancies. It was decided relentlessly to sacrifice every idealist fancy which could not be brought into harmony with the facts conceived in their own and not in a fantastic connection. And materialism means nothing more than this.